Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Despite Ferrari making progress in recent races, they are still far away from where they expected to be this season. Ferrari were hoping to fight for both championships that year. That is far off the table, roughly a third of the way through the season, and as a result, Fred Vasseur is under serious pressure. The pit stops are great, everything else apart from the drivers themselves is a serious question mark, and rumours have emerged over the last day or so that Ferrari are considering whether a change in team principal could be a good idea in the near future. Vasseur has not been in that role for too long, and arguably has done a better job after the results last year than we have seen for many of the recent TPs at Ferrari, certainly Matteo Binotto. But if Christian Horner was available, maybe they should go for him, and that's the rumour of the last day, that Ferrari are having those conversations. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. Plenty to get into today, as you can imagine. This is Christian Horner talking about Monaco. Now, this is the last time hopefully we'll talk about Monaco and the Grand Prix circuit for another year, because we always talk about this type of stuff every year, but this year was especially interesting because they changed a few things. They added the two-stop with the intention that it would make the race better. And look, I think it did, kind of. But look, the fundamental issue, of course, is that you can just slow down by 7 seconds and nobody can do anything about it because you can't overtake. And Horner says, look, we just need to create a bit more of a braking area, either on the exit of the tunnel or turn one. If there was any way of creating a longer braking zone, we should really investigate it. Now, Alex Wirtz, who, GPDA chairman, he also, I think, designed a couple of circuits, especially, I think, the Scuderia circuit they're going to be running in Saudi Arabia in a couple of years. I think that's one of his designs. This is the current setup for the Nouvelle Chicane. These are his 3 ideas to try and improve the circuit. And effectively, one of them, I think the Nouvelle Chicane is the big possibility, in my opinion. This is where the overtaking opportunities, this is where the only overtake if this race happened was Lance Stroll on the outside, can you believe it, of the Nouvelle Chicane. But what do you do? The option could be to extend this zone. The other option is to extend going into the tunnel, that we'll see in a second, but there is the option potentially to change how this chicane works. Instead, you'd push the chicane slightly further back, maybe 80 meters further back than it currently is. Then you would have a heavier braking zone and you would re-profile this section around the marina. That's something you could consider. Rascasse as well could be re-profiled in addition, having a wider entry line, a new apex on the corner, because, sometimes you can make overtakes happen here as well. And then, of course, there's the hairpin, the Lowe's hairpin, now known as the Fairmont hairpin, because I think that's how they renamed the hotel that overlooks it. If you widened it in a couple of ways, then it would give opportunities for more overtaking. In my opinion, though, the Nouvelle Chicane and this whole sequence, that is the way to go if you are going to do anything. Russell talked about it and said, maybe a plane can fly over and put water on the track at a random point. Maybe we do the Lego racing instead. Maybe instead of 2 pit stops, we have 15. So, it would be chaos. Just to quickly mention another possibility, here we are on Google Maps. I like doing this when I get the chance anyway. This, as you, I'm sure, recognise, is the run down from the hairpin. Now, currently, the drivers go down this way, they turn right, and then they go into the tunnel. There is, however, a roundabout here, and it would not be impossible for the drivers to come out of the hairpin, turn left, run around this way, go around this roundabout, basically, or, go round here. And then, it would be a bit messy, but the point is that anyway, as you come out of this sequence, you would then be, so typically the corner would be there where the motorbike is. Instead, you'd be coming out of this turn here, and you'd have a longer run into the tunnel. And of course, by the time you got to the end of the tunnel, you'd then be carrying higher speed. Now, the reason why I'm a bit precarious about suggesting this is because, the speeds in the tunnel are already pretty high, and, the tunnel can be a pretty dangerous spot. So increasing the entry speed quite considerably into the tunnel is maybe not the way to go. I think I do prefer Alex Wirtz's idea of actually instead extending what it looks like on the back ends, where, you have this section further down here. That's probably, if you had to make changes to the track, and we probably do need them, let's be honest, that's probably what I would look to do. But intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Otherwise, we just do qualifying and we give out the points then. And the race is, I don't know, some drivers even suggested you do a qualifying session both days. I don't know about that. Look, the Grand Prix, it's a procession, but it's kind of Formula 1 on some level. Now, Matteo Binotto, he's a conversation topic today, especially because of the Ferrari stuff. Now he's working with Audi. Every team is saying, oh yeah, 2026 is going to be great, apart from Audi. They are very realistic with their expectations, and as he says, we know that 2026 will not be the year in which we will be at the top. We won't have the best power unit, but the path we have taken is the right one. So, a bit concerning. They've said this before. This isn't a new phenomenon exactly, but the idea that Binotto and Audi are literally saying, yeah, our engine's going to be pretty crap compared to, the Merc or whatever, that's obviously a bit of a concern. Especially because it's their first year building a Formula 1 car anyway. Okay, they're bought over Sauber, but it's not like Sauber are producing a banging chassis year after year at the moment, is it? So, yeah, Audi are not expected to be especially good next year. The real expected frontrunners, of course, Mercedes, McLaren, Ferrari, usual suspects. We're not so sure about Red Bull Racing right now, which is the big question around Horner and Verstappen and their future with that team. Couple of updates to mention. So Mercedes' new rear suspension is going to be re-evaluated in Barcelona. So they made a couple of changes here. They made this change for the Imola Grand Prix. They reprofiled the rear suspension, one of the major changes that they made. Has it helped them? I mean, Imola and Monaco were both not good races. So, but look, their intention is Mercedes that this is going to improve the car. And, well, as Toto says, we'll evaluate in Barcelona. Barcelona is the big one, right? Because they're changing the front and rear wings, the flexibility. There's going to be so many changes to these cars for Barcelona, which is really exciting, potentially for some teams for good and for bad. The other big debate, though, is that it is typically considered one of the best benchmark circuits you're going to find. As you guys know, I think Barcelona is a much better circuit than people give it credit for, but even outside of that, no one's going to deny that it has a great mix of corner types. It has a very long straight, it has some high-speed corners, it has some medium-speed corners, it has some lower-speed corners, fewer since the removal of the final chicane, but it's still got, and I'm very happy that chicane is gone, by the way, but it's still got, turn 10, for example, still got some slower-speed corners, and it was the testing circuit for years, for good reason, because it has everything you need, and the teams have all the data you'd ever need around a track like this. Now, for Mercedes and for all the other teams, it's going to be a very important benchmark. The logic tends to go, if you're good at Barcelona, you should be pretty good everywhere. It doesn't always apply, but that, you tend to see the performance differentials between the cars get exacerbated a bit because there's just so much compromise that is necessary at the circuit. So it's going to be a big test for Mercedes. Ferrari, it's going to be a big test for them as well. The last two Grand Prix have been better. They have rear suspension updates themselves on the way. And reports are starting to be discussed that apparently Ferrari have made progress on their tyre wear side. They've made some improvements in the low-speed corners. But, I don't really know if this data is taken from Monaco, because if we're really considering Monaco, you've got to take everything at Monaco with a bit of a grain of salt. Ferrari even said it, basically, that, look, if they set up their car with no compromise and just focus on low-speed corners, then it works. But what they struggle with is to have simultaneously good high and medium speed performance and the low-speed performance at the same time. That's where they've been struggling lately. Has that changed? Well, I don't know. Barcelona will give us some answers with the updates they are going to bring as well. The SF25 is going to head to, Barcelona with a new front wing. So basically all the teams, certainly the front runners, who have been messing around with flexible wing designs, are going to have to make stiffer and also, though, aerodynamically revised. This will be interesting, right? Because will McLaren bring a new front wing that does not flex, it's stiffer, but it looks the same? Or will the teams actually have a revised version which is stiffer because it has to be and it's revised? Maybe. We'll see. But Ferrari apparently have a design which has been in the works for some time that they will bring, which is obviously fitting of the regulations, but also gives potentially some advantage that they're looking for as well. And we know that the front wing is maybe the most important part of the car in terms of what it does for the airflow for the rest of the machine. Also a new rear wing, aerodynamically anyway. Carried over from 2024, modified at the end plates. So, yeah, they've got new front and new rear wings on the Ferrari. The new rear wing is expected to feature a fat main plane that provides higher downforce, complementing the existing V-shaped version. With these updates, the team aims to gather clear data on car balance, aero flexibility, and tyre wear. So, here we go. Ferrari are in the final stretch of this entire regulation stint, and they're here to gather data. But, we'll see, I suppose, what it means for next year as well. The other discussion, of course, has been around the stiffer front wings. Everyone hopes that McLaren are going to lose the most, not McLaren fans, right, or Lando Norris or Oscar Piastri, but, the other teams certainly hope that. Vasseur calculates it like this: Ferrari was the most conservative when developing these flexi wings, so they have the least to lose. That's what Vasseur says, but I do think that the reaction here, where Ferrari stand after Spain, will I think be relevant to the future of Fred Vasseur and Ferrari, because this year has been a massive letdown. Hamilton said that the Monaco Grand Prix was frankly miserable. I mean, qualifying, I'm sure it's fun. I mean, it's fun to drive around this circuit as a driver when you get the chance to do so properly, as George Russell found out, which is why he got the chicane and, of course, jumped ahead and got the drive-through penalty as a result. But Ferrari have been under lots of scrutiny this year because last year was so promising. This year they were expected to fight for the title. In both championships, they're so far behind that it's completely impossible for them to win either as it presently stands. So where do they go from here? Fred Vasseur seems to do a pretty good job. He came into the team, he fired a few people, he brought some new people on, and we're still kind of in that process. I think Vasseur deserves a bit more time. I think what frustrates me about Vasseur is that despite seeming like such a reasonable team principal at Alfa Romeo, coming into Ferrari, there's multiple things that he said that I'm like, wow, that is just Ferrari politics in a nutshell. And maybe that there's no saving that. But Vasseur will talk about the potential in the car and all these other things that we've heard a million times before. And even the comments about Hamilton and his radio engineer, his race engineer, on the radio. Hamilton, of course, said, "Are you upset with me or something?" after the race. Vasseur then played this down and said, like, there's no tension. But it's only Ferrari that ever has to do this, right? Like, I think that's the key point for many. Is like, once again, we've got Ferrari coming out and saying, oh no, there's nothing to see here. There's no issues behind the scenes at our team. I don't know what you're talking about. It's only Ferrari that ever has to say this type of stuff. Vasseur says, when a driver is asking something between turn 1 and turn 3, we have to wait until the tunnel to reply to avoid speaking with him during the corners. It's not that we are sleeping, it's not that we're having a beer on the pit wall, it's just because we have a section of the track where we agreed before to speak with him, and honestly, it's not a tension. The guy is asking something, he's between the wall, he's under pressure, he's fighting, he's at 300 kph, he's keeping the edge between the walls, and I'm perfectly fine. When I spoke with him after the race, he was not upset at all. So, Vasseur saying that Hamilton was not upset and there's no issue, was Adami upset? Because that's, like, Hamilton asked the question to his race engineer to say, you upset with me? Vasseur says Hamilton wasn't upset, but he doesn't specifically comment on the race engineer situation. But, yeah, I don't know. Ferrari are a weird team. They always have been, and maybe that will still be the case. But I do know that lots of Ferrari fans have been losing patience with Fred Vasseur. This year was expected to be the season. Next year there's discussions that maybe their engine isn't going to be good enough to really compete, and therefore that's probably it for Hamilton's chances to win the 8th World Championship. Yes, they won in China, the sprint race, then they got double disqualified during the main Grand Prix. They changed 99% of the car and it didn't really work. The question is whether Vasseur's leadership here, given he's been in charge for some time, is really working. Yeah, they've got their pit stops sorted out, but in terms of comms and execution and, these other elements, it's not been so clear-cut. I do think Vasseur's done a pretty good job overall. There are elements of his kind of, not exactly character, but the elements of where he speaks, which I do find frustrating. I also found it just interesting that Vasseur was so celebratory with... You might not think this is a big deal. You guys remember when Lando won the Grand Prix or whatever? Vasseur was like celebrating with the McLaren team. I don't know, I'm sure there were many Ferrari fans out there saying, what do you mean you're celebrating with McLaren? Those are the arch rivals, right? Like, McLaren and Ferrari was the rivalry in Formula 1 for a long time. So it's probably no big deal, but I thought I'd just find some pictures here, because yeah, this is from Miami, if you guys remember when Lando won last year, and here's Vasseur spraying the champagne on the McLaren guys, here he is putting on a papaya hat. So, I don't know, I'm sure Ferrari fans felt a certain way about that, at least some of them will have done. And the general feeling is, as Damon Hill says, that Fred Vasseur is going to be feeling the heat as it stands over the challenging season for Ferrari so far. But Ferrari have gone through plenty of team principals over the last decade or so. The changes they've made haven't really worked. Sticking with Vasseur, I think, would probably be the correct decision, unless there's somebody else on the market and available. And this is when the big drama of the last couple of weeks comes in around Christian Horner. So there was a rumour before Imola that Horner was set to be sacked if things didn't go to plan, if the upgrades didn't work, if the car didn't improve. If Verstappen wasn't happy, then all of the drama that we saw last year with Horner, the chickens were going to come home to roost or whatever, and Horner was going to go. And because maybe the Thai family weren't so keen with him anymore, and then the Austrians were going to make their decision known. Marco said complete nonsense. Somebody wants to make themselves important again. So, look, Red Bull have shut down the rumours and Max won in Imola, right? So that potentially put to bed some of the frustrations and the drama. But Build yesterday, build.de, and look, they are not exactly the most... it's not coming from AMUS, right? But within reason, you know, they do come up with some rumours from time to time. And according to certain reports, Ferrari have reached out to Christian Horner to potentially bring him to Maranello. Now, this I don't think is absolutely new news. We've heard about this before in recent seasons, because whatever you think of Christian Horner, like, his track record does speak for itself. What he was able to do with Red Bull Racing, coming in there at such a young age, building the team that he did, and even, you know, maintaining that success throughout the period, despite all the issues with the engine that they suffered from, getting back to the top. And even nowadays, you know, the car isn't as good as it was, and yes, was there some mismanagement in the way that the Adrian Newey stuff was handled and everything, let's say the mismanagement of personal affairs behind the scenes? Yeah, there have been problems. But over the last couple of decades, Horner, you would still argue, is the most effective team principal in Formula 1. So I think Ferrari might be wise to at least have a conversation there. But it does make things very interesting, because if it's true that Ferrari actually reached out to Horner to say, you know, to have a conversation with him, it implies that they are totally not convinced that Vasseur is necessarily the right man. Now, I don't expect this to happen soon, but it is interesting, right, that the rumours were around a couple of weeks ago that Horner might be sacked from Red Bull. Ollie Oakes was apparently going to take his job, although that's not true because he's fled to Dubai. And it doesn't seem like Horner's going to go anyway. But if Horner's under some serious pressure and Ferrari are saying, look, if you leave, like, you know, we're pretty happy to maybe make it happen over here at Ferrari, then it could be a very different story. Man, I mean, a Hamilton-Horner driver team principal pairing would feed families, I think, on some level. It would be very, very strange. So I don't expect it. And I don't think that Vasseur's necessarily doing a terrible job. But I do think that this is quite telling, right? Like, if Ferrari are considering the possibility, then, you know, I'm not saying it's happening, but it certainly has a reasonable likelihood to happen in the relatively near future. So very much interested your thoughts on that in the comments below. You know, do you think this would be a good move for Ferrari if they were to do it? At this point, it arguably is too late, really, to change all that much. Of course, they're working hard for 2026 anyway. I think Vasseur will be given a bit more time. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if 2026 doesn't go to plan. I wouldn't be surprised if something like this actually does transpire. So enjoy your thoughts in the comments. Just a couple of final things. These are the overtakes in Monaco over the years. And look, it's never been a great track. I mean, even in 2007, 2 overtakes, right? Now, some years, especially when rain is involved, chaotic things can happen. But often, of course, that is not what we see around the Principality. So very much interested in your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.